All right, 11 o'clock fam. Man, welcome to church. This is 11 o'clock and it's raining outside and you decided to show up, and that's just amazing every time it happens. Yeah, somebody decided to clap a little bit. That's an acceptable thing. You can celebrate yourself. That's a weird thing that we do in our culture. We decide to not let people celebrate the positive things, but we try to bring up the negatives. Anyways, different sermon, different day. My name is Ben and I have the honor of serving as the lead pastor here at DCC. I want to say a couple things. One, as we're getting started, we're in this trajectory towards faith, and one of the things that we're putting faith in is, in case you didn't know, like they said, there's a chili cook-off. The Kaempfer family, the Kaempfer dad, that's me, plus our kids, we are joining together forces familially, and we will, and I want to announce this at the 11 o'clock service, we are entering a chili into the chili cook-off. So I want you to know, many of you know how to work hard. You're going to learn to compete on Sunday, okay? I'm excited about that. We launched into a series on faith, and the whole idea behind it, and one of the things that's been really encouraging is for the longest time for me, the reason we wanted to spend from basically now until Easter kind of on this same subject, not on the exact same idea, but the same subject matter, is because for me for far too long, faith in the church space has been this just really ambiguous, generalized idea. It's just this, at times, it's just kind of a blanket for how do we, create and think about and put a blanket statement or assumption over spiritual things. We'll just call it faith, So it's, well, gosh, why do you believe this? Well, I don't know, I just have faith. Well, why do you think that? I don't know, I just have faith. It becomes kind of like an answer to a question that we don't know the answer to. To some degree, it's like I have faith, which means I just believe that there's an existence of God. But one of the things that's been cool and we've been pushing towards is to say faith is not simply the knowledge or the awareness. That's kind of the starting point. But it's more so, as the Bible describes it, biblical faith, is this idea where God, not only do I know you're there, but I actually trust you. Right? Not just you exist, but I actually trust you in the actions of my life, which means that, as the Bible describes it, faith is a little bit less like just agreeing conceptually or assenting to a set of truth claims. It looks a lot more like obedience. This is a thing that God is calling me to do. He's calling me to say. He's calling me to not do. He's calling me to not say. He's calling me, whatever, wherever. But it's a little bit more like obedience. And we were in a community group, a dad's group that we have on Monday mornings at 6:30 in the morning on Zoom, and which for me, I roll in after the 8 o'clock service, which has been amazing and phenomenal here recently, well, continually, but it's kind of building up. And so I roll in, I call it the 7 a.m. dad Zoom group, because that's when I show up. And I dropped in on this conversation that people were having. They were talking about, how is God testing your faith? How is God testing your faith? And every time I've heard that framing, God testing my faith, it's God testing whether or not I will continue on with him if I believe in him existentially. And he said, man, God's really testing my faith to continue to love and be patient with my kids and love and serve my wife well. I thought, that's faith. Like doing that when I don't feel like doing that when everything inside of me wants to do the opposite of that, but saying, okay, God, in this moment, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do what you call me to do what you call me to say. And Hebrews 11 launches into this long list of people who have lived by faith, who we are studying this entire, from now until Easter. And if you haven't downloaded, I would just invite you. We've got an app that has an entire kind of the field guide for this. So QR code, you can scan it right now, you can scan it later, whatever you want to do. Honestly, I don't care if you download our app in general, but all I do care about is every single time that we come together, Hebrews 11 introduces a somewhat of a chronology, not a perfect chronology, but of people of the Old Testament who distributed and exuded, displayed and exuded extraordinary faith. And so we're just studying them. So every week when you come, know that we're going to be talking about some of the people or some of the stories that we read the previous week. And here's why I say that. I appreciate so much that so many of you trust me because I say it. But you need to read it for yourself. More important than you hearing me say it is for you to read it. And so this will act as the field guide that every time when you come in on Sunday, we're going to be talking about something that we have read over the last week. And it automates all that. There's an entire devotion, takes you through the chapters and verses and whatnot. So we would love for you to do that as you track and travel along. Now today what we're going to talk about specifically is something that I have never actually given a sermon on. And it's just ironic because this is one of the first stories that I remember learning in the Old Testament after I became a Christian. was in 9th or 10th grade, Leon High School, right down the road, and I was brought onto the leadership team, not because I had great leadership, but just because I think they were deficient. And in 10th grade, you don't really trust people with that much responsibility. So I was over this group called Skits and Games, which, if you know me, is like the least descriptive of my personality. I'm like, can we just be adults and hang out, right? Skits, what are we talking about? Although that was kind of like a fun little skit between Dylan and Delaney. I don't know if you know a lot of that stuff. But anyways, what's interesting is I read this verse this week, or this section this week, which was one of the first stories, because there was a skit about it. And I remember it so deeply, and actually, it's been very pivotal to me. And at first, when I was studying and preparing, I was thinking, man, this is just so simple. It's just so simple. And then I was thinking, yes, it's simple. But as I started to kind of delve into the depth of it, I thought, this is actually, I think, life-changing. And I don't say that in hyperbolic pastoral speech. What I mean is, the Bible is full of examples of people, broken people, who decide, man, I'm going to have a resilient faith and continue to live for God, continue to trust God. I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to continue to go towards that ideal. And every once in a while, it holds up an example and says, and don't be like this person. Right? Every good teacher, it's like, here's the positive, here's what I want you to do, here's what I want you to do. Now, here's what not to do. And so today is kind of a story of, here's what not to do. And we're going to read it, and you're going to think, this story is so crazy. Maybe it's made up. Maybe the level of transactional inequality that happens in this story, maybe it's made up. But I think what we're going to actually find is we find ourselves in this. And here's my hope. Not just like a, hey, don't do it, hey, don't do it, hey, don't do it. But on a deeper dive, here's why. Or more so, here's how to avoid some of life's most painful decisions and difficult mistakes. So if you got your Bible, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 25. Genesis 25, and if you haven't been tracking with us, let me catch you up, because some of this stuff is going to be important. So, Genesis beginning, number of chapters in, God speaks to this person, Abram, would later be called Abraham, or Father Abraham, who had many, and many sons had father. There you go, exactly right. So, you have Abraham, and God said, Abraham, or at the time, Abram, I'm going to make you a promise. And here's the promise. The promise is that though you are older, and though your wife is older, I'm going to make you and your family into this great nation. You're going to inherit this people, or this land, and your people are going to be a blessing to the entire world. In other words, I have a promise for you. And here's the promise, Abraham, that your non-existent family is not just going to become a family, but they're going to become a nation, this nation in this land that I'm going to give you. But these people, through you, through this lineage, the entire world is going to be blessed. And so there was a promise of a people, there was a promise of a land, and there was a promise of a continual blessing. Well, he had a difficult time having kids, but eventually he gave birth to this son, Isaac. And so where we pick up the story is Isaac beginning to have some difficult time having birth to what he would have as a son, or a couple. So if you got your Bible, that's the wrong chapter and verse. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 25. Start at verse 19. These are the generations after Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So they're, married, they're together, and they are saying, okay, there's going to be this promise, there's going to be this heir, but I'm the heir, and there's no heir below me. And so, God, would you provide, you provide, eventually becomes pregnant. Verse 22, the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? That is quite possibly the most Bible-y way that you could say, what's going on, right? Like, now she hasn't been pregnant before, and she's saying, okay, I feel something going down in here, right? And I don't know what it is. There's tension. We don't know if they're kicking, they're pushing, they're pulling. We don't know if one of them's got them like the other one in a headlock, but she feels this internal. She's saying, God, what in the world is happening? So it had to be probably substantive or significant for her to pray that. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations, this is going to be important later, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now, this was big because the older shall serve the younger was a reversal of the birth order of how things worked in their culture. The older son would get double the inheritance of all of the rest of the sons. Not only that, but they would come with a number of positions and or responsibilities depending on how you want to frame them. For instance, they would get double what everybody else got in terms of inheritance, but they would also get what was this kind of this judicial power. In other words, if there was ever anything that needed to be decided, a disagreement, this person, the older heir, would be the person who decided those things. They would be the person who decided, okay, this is where we're going to go, this is what we're going to do, but they would also, in their specific context, not just have a sense of familial leadership and material leadership, but they would actually, in addition to those things, have a spiritual leadership. They would be the ones that heard from God, and specifically in this, the lineage of which all the world would be blessed. So there was a ton that happened in this, and generally it was the older son. But he says, okay, here's what I want you to know. Before you even have these kiddos, that the younger one's going to be that, and the older one is actually going to serve the younger. Continues. So when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in the womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Now, Esau is kind of a play off of the Hebrew word red. And I am so thankful that we do not still name children off of how they come out of the womb, right? Our firstborn would be called Bloody Alien. Pray for the graphicness that I repent. After his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. And Jacob, by the way, for all the Jacobs in here, that means heel grabber. It's kind of like trickster, kind of like this like swindler type person. This was, you might think, okay, why heel grab? If you've ever been in a single file line with other middle school boys, you know what this means because you're walking and then just unprovoked, buddy behind just goes, wham, and you just all of a sudden you're kicked off or they step on your foot and give you like a flat tire type thing. They're like, okay, how do we describe Jacob? That's who this guy is, right? So you got hairy red baby and heel grabber. So wonderful family, it just gets more dysfunctional. As they grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Esau, manly, tough, whatever, right? Jacob, he drove a Prius. I used to drive a Prius. Anyways, Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So this is to say, okay, and even the family context was dysfunctional. Let me just pause and say this. This one of the reasons that I love the Bible is it never shies away from the mess. It never shies away from the mess. In fact, it's saying right here, this is a family who somehow at the beginning had the direction of the Lord to pray and say, God, we're calling on your name. And then through it say, and then we're going to pick weird names for our kids and be dysfunctional and have different parents favorite different kids. Here's what you should know. If you come from a dysfunctional family, and let me just give you a hint. You come from a dysfunctional family. Because we all do. Because we all are broken. And if my family wasn't dysfunctional, it would be dysfunctional once I was born. Because we all have areas of brokenness. And yes, because God worked those and God has seen those. But if you ever feel like that, here's the good news. Don't feel weird. Because this is the family through which Jesus would come. Which means God can redeem, he can restore, and he can use even in the midst of dysfunction. And what we're going to find out for the rest of these families is sometimes an extraordinary dysfunction. So this kicks off the actual story. So once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. So Jacob's been hanging out in the tents. He's been hanging out, gathering some stuff, maybe some sheep, and walking around. But he's now got this stew cooking. Esau came in from the field. It says that he was exhausted. That kind of puts it lightly. It's like he was having trouble gaining strength to say things. So Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I'm exhausted." Now, what's interesting here is the way this actual phrase, this is the writers trying to say, how do we communicate the best idea of what was actually said? Because what was actually said was what we actually say when we're hungry. And if you've ever been so hungry that sometimes you're hungry, you're exhausted, and you're like, man, I am having a difficult time forming sentences. We just call that hangry in our culture, right? This is what the actual Hebrew of this reads. And tell me this doesn't sound like, oh yeah, I've heard my friend say that. He says this, give me to eat, I pray thee, of the red, the this. Let me do that a little bit differently. Oh, hey, can I have the red, man, the this, right? He's like, he can't even frame the words. He can't even frame, he's like, just the red stuff, the this. We got OJ, Sunny D, he's like, oh, Sunny D, right? Like, just give me some of that because he's so hungry and he's so famished. Now, I want to read the rest of the story to you because the rest of the story, what we're going to pick apart is going to make perfect sense because this is easily the worst deal of all time. Here's how it goes. He says, I'm exhausted. Therefore, his name was called Edom. Edom, by the way, is a play off of the idea of red, which became his nickname, which, by the way, for the rest of the Bible, when you read about the Edomites, this is literally where that came from, okay? So you'll be able to track for the rest of time, be like, oh, Esau, Edomites, the bowl of stew. That's silly. Welcome. The Bible isn't silly, but it's crazy how these things work. So Jacob said, with his brother being exhausted, tired, hungry, sell me your birthright now. Sell me your birthright right now. And Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is my birthright to me? And so Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold him his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. And he ate, drank, rose, and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So he walks in. And he says, when Jacob sees Esau walking in, Jacob sees him and says, I got an idea. How about you sell me your inheritance for some lentils? And I know you guys know that that's a bad deal. But just in case anybody came in the room hungry, I have a packet of lentils, okay? After the service, I would be more than happy. We'll be right over there. I might be in the room, but kind of wherever I am, just come find me and say, I have an inheritance. You have lentils. I'm hungry. I will swear to you that I will give you your inheritance for these lentils. I just want you to know, if anybody wants to make that deal, right after service, $19.99, hey, we would love to make that deal, right? Nobody would be like, oh yeah, 100%, I'm walking in, give me some lentils, Ben. That's actually all I wanted. Some of you might be like, yo, I don't even have inheritance. I will trade you because at least I'll get lentils. I will trade you these lentils for the potential that you might have an inheritance someday. Now, no one would make that right decision. That just seems so ridiculous. And in the skit that I learned in FCA, this was the kind of the framing that they said over and over is don't sell your birthright. Don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans. Don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans. And as I was reading, I was thinking, man, this is the level of inequality that feels in this deal is ridiculous. It's almost unbelievable. And I read this in a commentary, and I thought this nails it. History shows that men prefer illusions to realities. Choose time rather than eternity, and pleasures of sin for a season rather than the joys of God forever. Men will read trash rather than the word of God, adhere to systems of priorities that leaves God out of their lives. Multitudes of men, this is the part, this on got me. Multitudes of men spend more time shaving than on their souls, and multitudes of women give more minutes to their makeup than to the life of the eternal spirit. Men still sell their birthright for a mess of pottage. Think about that. Like I was reading that, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, This was the thing that I remember early on was don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans. Don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans. Don't sell what is of eternal and significant and substantive consequence because of the fact that it's probably a little bit later on for this immediate felt need that you have right now because it's this desire and this appetite. But don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans. John Piper had this quote. I thought this was... I don't know that this is how it's going to work on the last day, but I just thought this was fascinating, challenging. It said this, one of the great uses of Twitter and Facebook, one of the great uses of Twitter and Facebook will be to prove at the last day that prayerlessness was not for lack of time. I just heard that and I thought, man, I don't know that that's what's going to happen at the last day. But I started to think about it, and there are so many ways that we do this. And this is the struggle for faith. It's the struggle for obedience. It's the struggle to say, okay, God, I have this desire, I have this need, I have this thing that I'm feeling, and in this moment, what I actually feel is I want to satiate that desire, and I'm tempted, because God, I know that's what you've called me to. I know the person, I know the ministry, I know the life, and God, so I'm tempted to trade this birthright for a bowl of beans. And when I was reading through this and studying this, it's one thing to say, okay, just stay away from it. Don't sell your birthright for a bowl of beans, because we all have that. We all have that. We all have that sense in which we can trade what's temporal for, or what's eternal for what's temporal. And there's a bunch of categories of this of sin. And there's categories of this of engaging in internet pornography or sleeping with my boyfriend or girlfriend. There's versions of this which is I'm going to go be much more concerned with what people think about me and status and success than what God's called me to. And that's true. And I think that there's a level of morality that certainly exists in this. I think the other part of it too, if we're just being honest, churches like ours are so good at creating moral obligations without even acknowledging the missional commands. In other words, it's just as dangerous to be very moral but completely off mission. Because you're a nice person not helping anybody influence heaven. I just started thinking, man, there's some of us that like the problem here that we're looking at, we're trading our birthright for a bowl of beans. Some of us, man, what we're doing with our lives is we're engaging in sin when we could be engaging with God. And some of us, we're just engaging with good things when we've traded the good things that were the things that God had actually and originally initially called us to. What's interesting about this, and if you look at this, what's interesting about this is this text doesn't just give us this dynamic. This text actually begins to drill down and give us the source of some of that. Look at this. As you read through it, there's multiple times that this pops up, but the entirety of it, the entirety of this push and of this temptation drives around one central thing. Now. Look, he says, Jacob said, let me eat something that's true, for I'm exhausted. Lord, in this moment, I am tired, I'm exhausted. I can't even put the sentence together. Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. He said, I'm about to die. Of what use is my birthright to me in this moment, because I'm about to die. And so Jacob said, swear to me now. What I find is really interesting is he said, okay, I have this need, or you have this need. In that need, in that realm of appetite, you have a sense of two things: scarcity and immediacy. Scarcity and immediacy. The right context, the right scarcity, and the right immediacy leads to compromise all the time. I'm lonely. And I don't want to be lonely for the rest of my life, and I'm feeling lonely inside. And there's not many suitable mates around. There's not many people who know and who love Jesus. There's not many people who I know who are just really going after him. Scarcity. And I need to find somebody now, because if I don't find somebody now, I don't think I'm going to find anybody. Immediacy. And there are relationships all over the place that compromise because of the fact that it was a felt need that met with an opportunity to acquire what felt scarce. And a decision felt like it needed to be made in a moment. This is one of the things I love. If you read Luke chapter 4, Luke talks about this. So Jesus was tempted in the desert, right? I mean, he just got baptized. The Spirit led him into the desert for 40 days without food and just was in this moment where all of a sudden, the devil comes in and starts to tempt him, and 3 different times tempts him. And at the end of it, it says one of the most fascinating things. It says, when the devil had finished all his tempting, in other words, when the devil had finished tempting Jesus, he left him. He left him until an opportune time. Here's why that's so significant. Did you know that there is an enemy of your soul, and his name is Satan? His name is the devil. And did you know that he is waiting for an opportune time where there's the right context environment, that there's the right sense of scarcity, that you feel the ability to meet this need, and at that time, you also feel there's scarcity and there's immediacy in the right context. So I'm lonely, and so I'm going to compromise. I learned this acronym a long time ago, and it has served me not in perfection, but it has saved me so much to know when I'm in this moment. It's called HALT. HALT. This is true for guys. I'm assuming this is true for women as well. When you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Hungry, angry, or both, hangry, lonely, or tired. Look at the Esau, right? He's hungry. He's angry maybe because he came out from the field and he's exhausted and his brother has some stuff. He's lonely because he's been out in the field by himself. He doesn't really have anybody else around. Dad, as we're going to find out, is kind of just laid up, not really doing much. And he's also tired. He says, I am exhausted, right? And in this hungry, angry, lonely, tired, what we find is that all of a sudden in the middle, Jacob comes and says, hey, I got this thing. By the way, everybody in the marketing campaign, in the marketing world, you've seen this, right? You mix felt need with a sense of scarcity, with a sense of immediacy. You need this. It's going to make your life better. Order now, right? $19.99 or $19.99, and while supplies last, you can order and get this. Welcome to business. Or Genesis. That's why I love the Bible. And what's fascinating in this, Jesus, look, I want you to do this. I want you to do this. I want you to, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. I want you to compromise, or that's kind of what happens with Esau, and he just decides to go down that route. And I was thinking about this, and I think there's 2 things for me as I was just processing it, because I was equal parts encouraged, honestly, by this text and equal parts challenged by this text. The part that was challenging to me was the part that I felt like, man, there are places in all of our lives, where we trade our birthright for a bowl of beans. We trade life for lentils. And the reason is because we think that in that moment, in the sense of, I need this, I have this desire for this, in that moment of, I see an opportunity to satiate that need, and in that moment of, I got to decide now because it might not be here tomorrow, I am going to think that in that decision is actually where I'm finding life. And at the end of it, you know what you find? Lentils. What's interesting about this is that that's true. Then there's a whole bunch of you. And this, I just started to get encouraged by this, to be honest, who see this, and you've decided life instead of lentils. You've decided to continue to have resilient faith, and you aren't perfect, but you continue to progress forward towards something. Because here's the thing, I think some of this, yes, it's true. Yes, it's true this happens morally. But I also think there's some of us who have been called to ministry. And I think, by the way, everyone is called to ministry. I don't put ministry as like a vocational versus non-vocational, but I do mean in this context, you've been called to vocational ministry. And inside of you, you're fighting it. Maybe you're just starting on towards your career. Maybe you're in the middle of your career. Maybe you're at the end of your career. You know that you feel deep down when it's just you and God, and you're sitting there saying, I got it, but I don't know, but I don't know, but I don't know, but I don't know. And that lentils look great. But you've traded the mission of God for a 401k. And those are absolutely not in diametric opposition, and that is somewhat of a false dichotomy. But not for all of us. Man, there's people, I was just thinking, like the Collies. The Collies have been amazing. The Collies senior family, Hope and Jay, who were at a church for a long time and felt like, man, we feel like God's calling us to this place. We feel like God's calling us to DC. There's so many young people. And so we're not just going to say, okay, we're going to go to this church. But they decided, okay, if we're going to go to this church, if we're going to be a part of this, we need to be around people. We need to be around students. We feel called to this ministry. We're going to sell our house in Killearn. We're going to move into the neighborhood right here. And we're going to host community groups. We're going to do premarital counseling. We're going to do young married groups on top of our premarital groups, and we're on the same time of that, we're going to do a starting point group. And through them, what was incredible, through them, this young, kind, but kind of unknown curly-haired dude named Gage walked in the door one day to a starting point group. And that Gage is the Gage who is now our youth director, who for the very first time this last Wednesday night, we had an actual youth group with we've had an actual youth group, but with production and with music, and they've had teaching, but they introduced the musical component to actually begin this, to make this a youth, the program of the night. People who decided, you know what, I could continue to exist in that place. It's very helpful. It's very safe. It's very comfortable. It's very filled with people my age. But I know that God has called me here, and so I'm going to go here, and I'm not going to go halfway in. I'm saying, man, this is the life that you called me to. And so for the last 2 minutes, I want to end in two different camps with this thing, is where I want to land this plane. On one, I want to say, okay, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? If that's the goal, if that's this resilient faith, this God, I'm going to give everything to you. And that's not going to Africa. And that's not going to Mexico. That's not going to to India or to some other place to do mission work. But maybe God's calling you to that too, and that's just the direction he's called you. And that's amazing. That's beautiful. That's incredible. Maybe he's called you to just go kill it and crush it in whatever job, and you're going to be the most successful person at your potential field. He's going to put you in a position of influence, and you're going to be like Abraham. He's going to make your name great. Don't you dare forget that the reason he made Abraham's name great is not because Abraham was great, it's because Abraham's job was to make Jesus great, or make God great in that. He said, I have blessed you so that you will be a blessing. So here's how I want to end this. Hebrews picks up on this idea, Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12 in verse 15. I want to end this with, so what do we do with it? If you realize, man, I am trading my birthright for a bowl of stew in my relationship. Trading my birthright for a bowl of stew every day when I don't tend to spend time with Jesus. I'm trading my birthright for a bowl of stew in whatever context and area. Here's what Hebrews says. Starting at verse 15. It says, see to it, that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. In other words, see to it that no one stops, no one ceases, no one stops. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. He says, okay, so I want you to see to it. Here's what I want you to see. I want you to get what God has for you. I want you to experience the life that when John 10:10, when Jesus said, I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. And I want you to know that life is found in me. Life is not found in lentils, but I know that you're going to be at times very tempted to think that life is found in these lentils. So let me just tell you, before you get to that point, let no root spring up and cause trouble. In other words, here's what is incredible. This temptation didn't start at that temptation. This temptation started long ago for Esau. This temptation was a temptation that would grow. And that at the point of its pinnacle would create the most ridiculous transaction. Did you know that almost every sin that we engage with on a regular basis, or not on a regular basis, has its roots somewhere long before that sin and that temptation took place? You didn't compromise sexually in the moment. You compromised when you decided to go to that house. You compromised when you decided not to put accountability in place. You compromised when you decided that I'm going to live in isolation. We've gone a little bit too far, and I don't want to confess it when it's small, because I think I can manage it right now and people will think different of me. Pride got in the way. Lack of accountability and transparency got in the way. And you have that natural appetite that God gave you, yes. But the reality is this. Get it at its root. Before you're hungry, before you're angry, before you're lonely, before you're tired, before you feel this sense of need, before you feel this sense of opportunity, before you feel this sense of limited availability and scarcity, what's that thing going on inside of you that you can start to deal with now? And it's not going to completely take away the temptation, but good grief, does it lose its teeth? Its claws become more dull. Its teeth become less sharp. And when you're in that moment, you can fight, because this isn't the first time you started fighting it. You started fighting it a long time ago. He says, so I want you to know this, that don't let any of that root come up. Don't let it spring up. It causes trouble. And by the way, it becomes this sense of defilement, that no one, verse 16, is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau. He says, what's the perfect example of this? Someone who didn't get to the root. He says, okay, Esau, great example, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterwards, and this is the problem, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. I gotta tell you this. This is the second part. So if you're in that space, as many of us are, I just want to invite you to say, man, what's the birthright that you're trading for a bowl of beans? And what's the root that God's calling you to attack now before you're in that moment? And the second one is this. Esau began to despise his birthright. Not because he despised his birthright, but because how much he actually desired his birthright. Esau later on begged for it back. And it would be very disingenuous of me at this point to say, here's the good news. No matter how far you've gone, no matter what you've done, no matter what's happened, God can make it all clean. God can remove it as if it didn't happen. He can make it clean, but many of us will still live in the consequences of the things that we've done and the decisions that we've made. But here's what I want you to know. God might not make it as if it did not happen, but God will absolutely, in terms of the consequences of our life, but God will absolutely use the brokenness of what happened to redeem and restore and to bring salvation. What I love is that this is the Edomites. The Edomites would turn into two nations. The Edomites would be, by the way, the ones that when the nation of Israel got put in Egyptian slavery, and I didn't even say this. He said, man, what's at stake here? What's at stake here? What good is a birthright to me if I'm dead? Jacob got the birthright, and every single person here knew Jacob's name before you walked in. You might say, I didn't. Did you know he got renamed? You know what his name is? It's a name that every person in here has heard. I promise. His name went from Jacob to Israel. That Israel that we heard of today, or we hear of today in our news, that's the guy. That's the family. That's the blessing. And he didn't realize, he was so short-sighted in that moment, he didn't realize. And what would happen is, though he didn't have a chance, God would still use this conflict to bring restoration and salvation. Because someday this nation of Egypt, this nation of Israel, they would be enslaved in Egypt. And through this leader Moses, they would be let go into the wilderness to wander, to go towards the promised land. But between them and the promised land was this place called Edom, where the Edomites lived. And they couldn't go through to the promised land because there was too much conflict. When they tried to go through, they said, no, absolutely not. This would be the same one that throughout the Old Testament, there would be constant conflict between Edom and between Israel. And it would continue on to the point where when Babylon was about to come in and they were about to destroy everything, they're about to destroy everybody, the Edomites were the ones who said, yep, you can get to Judah, you can get to the people of God through us. And they became the conduit through which the Babylonians would go and decimate the people of God. They would eventually be the people, by the way, Alexander the Great, Greek culture, Hellenization, you've read about it and studied about it. What would happen is this group of people would, through the Greek culture, take a slightly different name. That name would be the name that this person, this leader someday would be from the lineage of, and his name was Herod. Herod, who was the one when Jesus was born, Herod the Great, when Jesus was born, would be the one who wanted to kill Jesus, the infant, because he posed a threat to his kingdom. And through the next Herod, Herod Antipas, the same lineage of Esau, would be the one who would be presiding over and killing Jesus. But God used that to bring salvation to the entire world. That through this conflict, as Isaiah would say, it was the will of God to crush him. And was it perfect restoration? No. But did God use that imperfect restoration to bring reconciliation? Absolutely. Did he use it to bring salvation? Absolutely. That through his death on a cross, when he hung there, it was as if he was saying, for anybody and everybody, I don't care what you've been through, I don't care who you are, I don't care where you are, but I want you to know that this is for everyone. And I might not go and make it to where as if it never happened, but I can promise you that with what has happened, I continually work through brokenness to bring reconciliation and salvation, and you are invited. So for some of us, the next step is for us to say, God, I'm trading my birthright for a bowl of beans and I need to stop. And you help me to fight it at its source, because what I'm experiencing is I'm hungry and I'm angry and I'm lonely and I'm tired and I just give up. So God, will you help me to put things in place? God, will you help me to ask for accountability? God, will you help me to seek? God, will you help me to talk? Will you help me to, whatever it takes, will you help me to deal with this at its root? Because I don't want to live a life that I end up getting to the end of life, realizing I never experienced life and I always experienced lentils. For some of us, it's just simply to say and pray and say, God, I've been sold my birthright for a bowl of beans. And God, I'm going to live for you. And I don't know how, but I'm just trusting faith that as I continue to live for you, even if I don't see it, you're going to work through it. Reconciliation, restoration, and salvation. We're going to close by taking communion together. Because on last night, Jesus died. Right before he died, he got his closest disciples together and he said, this is my body, which is broken for you. This is my blood, which is shed for you. I want you to take, I want you to eat, I want you to do this in remembrance of me. And for some of us, as we take communion together, the message is this. In the same way that Jesus died on the cross, I need to put my sin to death so that I can have life in him. Help me to not trade my birthright for a bowl of beans. Help me to deal with it at its root. And for some of us, it's God, if you can take the cross and you can create salvation and restoration through it, God, I trust you. So when I eat this and when I drink this, God, I'm just going to say, I trust you. I don't know how it's going to work, but I've traded way too many birthrights for bowls of beans. So here it is. I trust you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that you work through our dysfunction. Thank you for the fact that you work continually through dysfunctional families, and you created a new family, the family of God, which is still a group of people who are dysfunctional but resiliently living for you, going and living for you, whatever you've called us to do, wherever you've called us to go, that's what we're going to do. And God, I pray that every single place and space and area in our life that you have given us the awareness that we've been trading birthrights for bowls of beans. We've been trading what's temporal. We've been trading what's eternal and putting what's temporal in its place because we have this appetite, we have this desire, we have this need. We overestimate the temporal, underestimate the eternal. And we're trading. Jesus, would you help us to see clearly what those areas are and give us the courage to deal with it at its root. And for everybody in here who maybe their biggest problem right now is a loss of hope because they feel like it's too far down the road. And it might not be back down the same road that it was, but God, you never promised that, but you promised that you will use it. I just pray that they would hold on to that truth, hold on to that reality, and not continue to make the same mistake, but Jesus, just fully lean in and live for you, that you would bring redemption, restoration. In some places you would bring reconciliation where it doesn't feel like it's there. You would bring redemption to where it doesn't feel like it's there, God. But more than anything else, I just pray that it would be useful to you and your kingdom. And so, Jesus, whatever we are, whatever it is, we just simply say, if you would die for us, if you would give everything for us, a group of people who compared to you are not worth much more than lentils, not because of how insignificant we are, but because of how significant you are. God, we just say, if you would give Jesus for us, then we trust you with all of us, with all of our hearts and all of our lives. We trust you.